The sound of buzzards circling overhead was the last thing Willa Zimmerman expected to hear on what should have been an ordinary supply run. But there they were, black wings cutting through the merciless blue sky above the New Mexico desert, as her husband Marcus reined in their wagon and told her to get out. It was August of 1878, and the heat rose from the cracked earth in waves that made the distant mesas shimmer like mirages. Willa stared at Marcus, certain she had misheard him over the constant whisper of wind through the sage brush. They had been married for 3 years, and though their union had grown cold in recent months, she never imagined it would come to this. I said, "Get out." Marcus did not look at her when he spoke. His jaw was set in that stubborn way she had once found endearing, back when they courted in Red River, back before the silver mine went bust and the debts piled up like storm clouds on the horizon. "Marcus, what are you talking about? We are 15 miles from town, maybe more." Willa gripped the wooden seat beneath her, her knuckles white against the weathered planks. The blue calico dress she wore was already soaked through with sweat, clinging to her back in the oppressive heat. "Should have thought about that before you refused to sign the papers." His voice was flat, emotionless, as though he were discussing the weather rather than her life. "My brother wants the land your daddy left you, and you are the only thing standing in the way of clearing my debts." The words hit her like a physical blow. Willa had known Marcus was desperate, had known his gambling had gotten worse after the mine closed, but she never thought he would sink to this level of cruelty. Her father had left her that small ranch outside of Red River, 20 acres of decent grazing land with a spring-fed creek running through it. It was all she had left of him, and Marcus knew what it meant to her. "I will not give you my land so you can sell it to pay gambling debts," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That land was my father's legacy, and I will not dishonor his memory by throwing it away on cards and whiskey." Marcus finally turned to look at her, and Willa barely recognized the man she had married. His eyes were hard, calculating, devoid of any warmth or affection. "Then I reckon we have nothing more to discuss. Get out of the wagon, Willa. You cannot be serious. I will die out here." "That is your choice to make." He reached across and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "Now get out before I throw you out." Willa knew in that moment that arguing was futile. The man sitting beside her was a stranger, someone capable of murder for money. With trembling hands, she climbed down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the sandy soil. The heat hit her like a furnace blast, stealing the breath from her lungs. "Marcus, please," she tried one last time, looking up at him. "We can work something out. We can go back to town and talk to the bank, find another way." He did not answer. Instead, he snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward, pulling the wagon away in a cloud of dust. Willa stood frozen, watching the only shelter for miles disappear down the rutted trail. She called out his name twice, but the desert swallowed her voice, offering nothing in return but the screech of a hawk and the incessant buzz of cicadas. When the wagon was nothing more than a dark speck on the horizon, Willa finally forced herself to move. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. The trail to Red River stretched behind her, a faint track through the scrub brush and rock. 15 miles, Marcus had said, maybe more. In this heat, without water or shade, she would be lucky to make it 5. She started walking anyway, because the alternative was to simply lie down and wait for death. The sun beat down on her head and shoulders with relentless fury. Within an hour, her tongue felt thick in her mouth, and her dress was stiff with dried sweat and dust. She had removed her bonnet to fan herself, but that only exposed her face to the brutal rays. Blisters formed on her heels where her boots rubbed, but she forced herself to keep moving. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, a harsh beauty of red rock, green sage, and scattered juniper trees that offered little shade. Willa tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but her thoughts kept drifting. She thought about her father, how he had warned her not to marry Marcus so quickly. She thought about the life she might have had if she had listened. She thought about water, cool and sweet, and how she would give anything for just a single sip. As the afternoon wore on, her steps became increasingly unsteady. The heat was not just uncomfortable now, it was dangerous. She could feel it draining the life from her body with every passing moment. Her vision started playing tricks on her, showing her pools of water that vanished as she approached, towns that dissolved into rock formations, people who turned out to be nothing more than twisted juniper trunks. Eventually, her legs simply gave out. Willa collapsed in the meager shade of a boulder, her breathing shallow and rapid. She tried to continue, but her body would not obey. The buzzards she had seen earlier were still circling, or perhaps they were different ones. It did not matter. They knew what she was beginning to accept. She was going to die out here in the desert, alone and betrayed by the man who had sworn to love and protect her. She must have lost consciousness then, because the next thing she knew, someone was speaking to her. A man's voice, deep and concerned. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" Willa tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt weighted down with lead. Strong hands lifted her, and she felt herself being moved, though she could not muster the strength to protest or help. Water touched her lips, just a few drops, and she moaned with relief. "Easy now," the voice said. "Not too much at once, or you will be sick. Just small sips." She forced her eyes open and found herself staring up at a man's face, shadowed by the brim of a dusty brown hat. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after a rain. Those eyes were filled with worry as he held a canteen to her lips, letting her drink just enough to wet her parched mouth. "That is better," he said softly. "You are going to be all right, madam. I have got you now." Willa wanted to ask who he was, wanted to know if this was real or just another desert mirage, but darkness pulled at her again, dragging her down into unconsciousness. This time, though, she went willingly, because those gray-green eyes had promised she would be safe. When Willa woke again, the sun had moved considerably across the sky, painting the western horizon in shades of orange and pink. She was lying on a bedroll in the shade of a rock overhang, a damp cloth on her forehead. Nearby, a small fire crackled, and the smell of coffee filled the air. The man from before was crouching by the fire, his back to her. He had removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He was lean and tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and long days in the saddle. As if sensing she was awake, he turned and caught her watching him. "Welcome back," he said, standing and walking over to her with a tin cup in his hand. "Think you can sit up? You need to get some water in you and maybe a little of this coffee if your stomach can handle it." Willa tried to push herself up, but her arms shook with the effort. The man set the cup down and helped her, supporting her back with one arm while he adjusted the bedroll behind her. His touch was gentle, respectful, so different from Marcus's rough handling earlier. "Thank you," she managed, her voice coming out as little more than a croak. "No need for thanks. Any decent person would have done the same." He handed her the cup of water, watching carefully as she drank. "Name is Everett Osborne. I have a small ranch about 8 miles west of here near the foothills. Willa Zimmerman." She paused, then amended. "Well, it was Willa Zimmerman before I married. Not sure what it is now." Everett's eyebrows rose slightly at that cryptic statement, but he did not press. "Can you tell me what happened, Mrs. Zimmerman? How you came to be out here alone without water or supplies." The concern in his voice nearly undid her. Willa felt tears prick at her eyes, the first real emotion she had allowed herself since Marcus had driven away. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. "My husband," she said slowly, "left me here. He wanted me to sign over my land, and when I refused, he simply drove off and left me to die." She watched Everett's face carefully, half expecting disbelief or accusation. After all, what kind of woman drove her husband to such desperate measures? But Everett's expression only darkened with anger, his jaw clenching. "That is not a man, that is a coward and a murderer," he said bluntly. "Where were you headed before he left you?" "Red River," Willa nodded. "We have a house there on the edge of town, or we did." "I suppose it is just his house now." "Like hell it is." Everett stood and walked back to the fire, pouring coffee into another tin cup. "When you are strong enough to travel, I will take you back to town. You can go to the sheriff and tell him what happened. Your husband should hang for what he did." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. Willa studied him more carefully in the fading light. He was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with the weathered skin of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots well made. Everything about him spoke of a man who worked hard and took pride in what he did. "I do not think the sheriff will care much," Willa said quietly. "Marcus comes from a prominent family in Red River. His brother owns the bank and they have friends in all the right places. A woman claiming her husband tried to kill her, without any proof beyond her word, will not get very far." Everett returned with the coffee and sat down on a rock near her bedroll, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe not, but you cannot just let him get away with it. What if he comes after you again?" "Then I suppose I will have to be more careful." Willa sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. It was strong and bitter, but it tasted like life, like hope. "I still have my father's ranch if Marcus has not already forged my signature on the deed. If I can get there, I can barricade myself in and dare him to try anything." 20 acres with a good spring near Red River?" Everett asked. When Willa nodded in surprise, he smiled slightly. "I know the place. Your father was Willa Zimmerman, right? Good man. He sold me my first breeding bull about 5 years back, gave me a fair price and sound advice." The mention of her father brought a genuine smile to Willa's face, the first in what felt like months. "That sounds like him. He always said a man's reputation was worth more than gold, and the only way to build a good one was to treat people fairly. He was right about that." Everett stared into the fire for a moment, then looked back at her. "Listen, Mrs. Zimmerman, I know we just met, but I want you to know you are not alone in this. If you need help protecting your land or dealing with your husband, you just say the word. I meant what I said before. Any man who would leave a woman to die in the desert is not worthy of the name, and he certainly does not deserve to profit from it." There was something in the way he said it, a fierce protectiveness that made Willa's heart skip. She barely knew this man, yet he was offering to stand between her and danger without hesitation. It was more than her own husband had ever done. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk getting involved in my troubles? You do not know me, and Marcus has powerful friends. Going against him could cause you problems." Everett met her gaze steadily, those unusual gray-green eyes holding hers. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because your father helped me when I was getting started, when I did not have much more than ambition and a prayer. I owe him a debt, and I reckon helping his daughter is a good way to repay it." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, bright and numerous in the clear desert sky. Willa felt some of her strength returning with the cooler evening air and the sustenance Everett had provided. She watched him move around the small camp, efficiently preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon, and found herself wondering about him. "You live alone on your ranch?" she asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush. It was a forward question, one that might be misinterpreted. If Everett noticed her embarrassment, he did not show it. "I do. Built the place myself 3 years ago after I saved up enough to buy the land. It is not much yet, just a small cabin and a barn, but I have about 50 head of cattle and I am building the herd slowly. Someday I hope to have one of the finest ranches in the territory." There was pride in his voice, but not arrogance. Willa found herself drawn to his quiet confidence, so different from Marcus's bluster and bragging. Marcus had always talked about what he would do, the fortune he would make, but Everett spoke of what he was building, brick by brick and day by day. "That sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "It must be satisfying to create something with your own hands." "It is." Everett brought over 2 plates of food and handed her one. "Though I will admit it gets lonely sometimes. Not much company out here except the cattle and my horse." They ate slowly, and Willa was grateful for Everett's patience in letting her recover at her own pace. As the night deepened, he built up the fire and spread out another bedroll on the opposite side of the flames. "You take the spot under the overhang," he said. "I will be fine out here. We will head out at first light, take it slow so as not to tire you out. Should be able to reach your father's ranch by midday if you are up to it." "Thank you, Mr. Osborne, for everything. You saved my life today." "Everett," he corrected gently. "And you would have done the same for me, I reckon." Willa was not so sure about that. She had lived in Red River for 3 years, and while she knew many of her neighbors by name, she could not say she truly knew them. The isolation of married life with Marcus had cut her off from the community, leaving her adrift and alone. But Everett's kindness tonight had reminded her that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others simply because it was right. She settled back onto the bedroll, her body aching but her spirits lifted. As she drifted off to sleep, she heard Everett moving around the camp, checking on the horses and securing their supplies. It was a comforting sound, the sound of someone keeping watch, someone who cared whether she lived or died. The next morning dawned clear and already warm. Willa woke to find Everett had coffee ready and was saddling the horses. Her body protested as she sat up, muscles stiff from yesterday's ordeal, but she forced herself to move. She could not afford weakness, not now. "How are you feeling?" Everett asked, bringing her coffee and some hardtack to soften in it. "Better than yesterday," she said truthfully. "Strong enough to ride if we can take it easy." "We will take it as easy as you need." He helped her to her feet, his hand steady under her elbow. "I figured you could ride my bay mare. She has got an easy gait and a gentle mouth. I will be on Buck, my gelding." The mare was indeed gentle, standing patiently as Everett helped Willa into the saddle. Her head spun slightly as she adjusted to the height, but she gripped the saddle horn and took a few deep breaths until the dizziness passed. They rode slowly through the awakening desert, following game trails and dry creek beds that Everett seemed to know by heart. He kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. Willa found herself relaxing in his presence, drawn to his easy manner and genuine interest in the land around them. "That mesa over there, the one that looks like a ship's prow, that marks the northern edge of my property," he said, pointing to a distinctive rock formation. "Your father's land starts about 2 miles south of mine. We are actually neighbors in the Western way of counting such things." "I had not realized we were so close," Willa said. It was both comforting and concerning. Comforting because it meant help was relatively near. Concerning because if Marcus came looking for her, Everett's ranch might be one of the first places he checked. As if reading her thoughts, Everett said, "When we get to your place, we should check and see if anyone has been there. If your husband has not already tried to forge documents, he might try to break in and search for them." They reached the Zimmerman ranch just before noon, as Everett had predicted. Willa felt a rush of emotion as the familiar buildings came into view. The small but sturdy ranch house her father had built, the barn where he had kept his horses, the corrals where he had worked with his cattle. It had been weeks since she had been here, Marcus always finding excuses to avoid visiting the property he so desperately wanted to control. Everything looked undisturbed from a distance, but as they drew closer, Willa noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Her heart sank. She had locked that door the last time she was here. She was certain of it. Everett noticed too. He reined in buck and held up a hand for Willa to stop. "Wait here," he said quietly, dismounting and pulling a rifle from his saddle scabbard. "Let me check it out first." Willa watched anxiously as Everett approached the house, moving with the careful grace of someone accustomed to potential danger. He pushed the door open with the rifle barrel and disappeared inside. Several long minutes passed before he reappeared, his expression grim. "Someone has been through the place," he called out. "Tossed it pretty good looking for something, but they are gone now. It is safe to come in." Willa dismounted on shaky legs and walked to the house. The sight that greeted her inside made her want to weep. Her father's carefully maintained home had been ransacked. Drawers hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. Furniture had been overturned, cushions sliced open. Even the floorboards had been pried up in places. "They were looking for the deed," she said flatly, surveying the destruction. "Marcus must have come here after he left me in the desert, hoping to find it so he could forge my signature or destroy it entirely. Did he find it?" Everett asked, setting his rifle aside and beginning to right an overturned chair. A small smile crossed Willa's face. "No. My father taught me to never keep important documents where people expect to find them." She walked to the fireplace and ran her hand along the underside of the mantel until her fingers found the small hidden catch. A section of the stonework swung open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a leather envelope containing several official-looking documents. "Smart man, your father," Everett said approvingly. Willa pulled out the envelope and checked the contents. The deed was there, along with her father's will and various other papers. Everything was intact. Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her lightheaded. "At least I still have this," she said, clutching the envelope to her chest. "Marcus cannot take the land if he cannot prove ownership." "He can still cause you trouble, though," Everett pointed out. "As your husband, he has legal rights to your property in the eyes of most courts. The law is not kind to married women when it comes to ownership." Willa knew he was right. Under the laws of New Mexico Territory, a married woman's property was generally controlled by her husband, even if she had owned it before the marriage. Her father had tried to protect her by leaving the land in trust, with specific provisions that required her signature for any sale or transfer, but Marcus could challenge that in court. With his brother owning the bank and half the town council in his pocket, he might well win. "Then I will have to make sure he does not get the chance," Willa said firmly. She looked around at the destruction of her childhood home and felt anger replace her earlier despair. Marcus had tried to kill her, had violated the sanctuary of her father's house, and now he thought he could simply take what was not his. She would not let him win. "What do you need?" Everett asked simply. Willa met his eyes, seeing the steady support there, the willingness to help without judgment or expectation. In that moment, Something shifted inside her. She had spent 3 years with a man who saw her only as a means to an end, who valued her solely for what she owned. But this stranger, this cowboy who had found her dying in the desert, he looked at her and saw a person worth saving, worth protecting, worth helping. "I need to make this place secure," she said. "And I need to figure out what my options are. Can I have the marriage dissolved? Can I prove attempted murder? Can I keep him away from my land? We will figure it out," Everett promised. "But first, let us clean up this mess and make sure you have a safe place to stay tonight. Then we can worry about the legal matters." They spent the rest of the afternoon setting the house to rights. Everett proved to be surprisingly domestic, working alongside Willa to sweep up broken dishes, repair what could be repaired, and organize what was left. As they worked, they talked, sharing pieces of their lives and histories. Willa learned that Everett had come to New Mexico from Texas after his parents died of fever, that he had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to start his own place, that he loved this harsh, beautiful land with a passion that matched her own. Everett learned about her childhood with her father after her mother passed, about her hasty marriage to Marcus that she now regretted, about her dreams of running the ranch the way her father had, with integrity and skill. The sun was setting by the time they finished, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Willa stood on the porch, looking out over the land her father had loved, and felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. Yes, she had problems. Yes, Marcus would likely try again to take what he wanted, but she was alive, she had her land, and she had found an unexpected ally. "I should probably head back to my place," Everett said, joining her on the porch. "But I do not like the idea of leaving you here alone." "What if your husband comes back? I have my father's shotgun," Willa said, though the thought of facing Marcus alone made her uneasy. "And I know how to use it." Everett frowned, clearly unhappy with this solution. "Tell you what. Why do not you come stay at my ranch for a few days, just until we can sort out the legal situation and make sure you are safe? I know it might not look proper, but given the circumstances, I think your safety is more important than appearances." Willa knew he was right, but the offer made her nervous. Not because she feared Everett would take advantage, he had proven himself honorable in every way, but because of what people might say. A married woman staying alone with a bachelor, even under dire circumstances, would cause talk in a small town like Red River. "People will assume things," she said quietly. "It could damage your reputation." "I do not give a damn about my reputation," Everett said bluntly. "And anyone who would judge you for trying to stay alive is not worth worrying about. Besides, you will have your own room, your own space. I am offering shelter, nothing more." The sincerity in his voice decided her. Willa nodded, grateful beyond words. "Thank you, Everett, I accept your offer." They gathered a few of her belongings, including the precious documents from the hidden compartment, and rode through the twilight to Everett's ranch. As he had described, it was a modest operation, but everything was well maintained and spoke of careful planning. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a large stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the surrounding hills. The barn was new, the wood still showing blonde where it had not yet weathered. "It is not fancy," Everett said as he helped her dismount, "but it is clean and the roof does not leak." "It is perfect," Willa said honestly. After yesterday's ordeal in the desert and the violation of her father's house, this simple cabin felt like a palace. Inside, Everett showed her to a small bedroom, clearly his own based on the personal items scattered about. "You take this room," he said. "I will bed down in the main room by the fire. It will be more comfortable for you." "I cannot take your bed," Willa protested, but Everett waved off her objections. You are recovering from heat sickness and God knows what else. You need proper rest. I have slept on worse than a floor in front of a warm fire, believe me." That night, lying in Everett's bed, Willa stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 2 days. She had nearly died. Her husband had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And yet, through all of that horror, she had found something unexpected. A connection with a good man who asked nothing of her except the chance to help. She thought about the way Everett looked at her, with respect and genuine interest. She thought about his easy kindness, his willingness to involve himself in her troubles. And she thought about how different he was from Marcus in every way that mattered. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. She was still married, still technically bound to a man who had tried to murder her. She had no business developing feelings for anyone, least of all her rescuer. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, it was Everett's gray-green eyes she saw in her mind, and his voice promising that everything would be all right. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Everett was up before dawn each day, tending to his cattle and the various tasks required to keep a ranch running. Willa, regaining her strength quickly in the cooler morning hours, began helping where she could. She cooked meals, mended clothes, and even rode out with Everett to check on the herd, delighting in the freedom of being useful again. They talked constantly, sharing opinions on everything from politics to philosophy, from ranching techniques to childhood memories. Willa found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn out by Everett's dry wit and self-deprecating humor. He, in turn, seemed to blossom in her company, becoming more animated and open with each passing day. On the 4th day, they rode into Red River together. It was time to confront the situation head-on, to see a lawyer, and find out what options Willa had for ending her marriage and protecting her property. Everett rode beside her like a silent guardian, his presence both comforting and somehow right, as though they had been doing this for years rather than days. The town of Red River was busy with mid-morning commerce, wagons rolling down the main street. People gathered in small groups outside the general store and the saloon. Willa felt eyes on her as they rode past, felt the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation. She held her head high, refusing to show any shame or embarrassment. They stopped at the office of Thomas Whitmore, the only lawyer in town who was not directly in Marcus's family's pocket. Whitmore was an elderly man with sharp blue eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened carefully as Willa recounted her story, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. "It is a difficult situation," he said when she finished. "Under territorial law, your husband does have considerable rights to your property. However, the trust your father established does provide some protection. The bigger issue is proving attempted murder. Without witnesses or evidence beyond your testimony, it will be difficult to pursue criminal charges." "What about a dissolution of marriage?" Everett asked. "Can she end the marriage based on his actions?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "Possibly. Abandonment and cruelty are grounds for divorce in New Mexico territory. The fact that he left you in the desert to die would certainly qualify as extreme cruelty. However, you need to understand that Marcus and his family will fight this. They want your land, and they will use every legal trick available to get it." "I do not care what they do," Willa said firmly. "I want to be free of him, and I want to protect my father's legacy, whatever it takes." "Then we will file the papers," Whitmore said. "I will need you to provide a sworn statement detailing what happened. Be prepared for Marcus to claim you are lying, possibly that you are mentally unstable or some such nonsense. It will get ugly." As they left the lawyer's office, Willa felt both relieved and apprehensive. She was taking action, fighting back, but she knew the battle ahead would be difficult. Marcus would not simply accept defeat, and his family had resources she could not match. "You did the right thing," Everett said as they walked their horses down the street toward the general store. "No matter what happens, you stood up for yourself." Before Willa could respond, a harsh voice called out, "Willa, where the hell have you been?" She turned to see Marcus striding toward them, his face flushed with anger. He looked disheveled, his clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, several men emerged from the saloon, clearly friends or associates drawn by the commotion. "I should ask you the same question," Willa said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Or rather, I should ask why you left me to die in the desert." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and she saw calculation replace some of the anger. "I do not know what you are talking about." "You wandered off from our camp, delirious from the heat. I have been searching for you for days, worried sick." It was a bald-faced lie, delivered with enough conviction that some of the gathering crowd murmured sympathetically. Willa felt rage boil up inside her, hot and fierce. "That is a lie and you know it," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You demanded I sign over my father's land. When I refused, you threw me out of the wagon 15 miles from town without water or supplies and left me to die. If not for Mr. Osborne finding me, I would be dead right now." Marcus turned his attention to Everett, looking him up and down with obvious disdain. "And who exactly are you? What business do you have getting involved in a private matter between a man and his wife?" "The name is Everett Osborne," Everett said calmly, though Willa could see the tension in his shoulders. "And I made it my business when I found your wife dying of exposure. What kind of man leaves a woman alone in the desert? What kind of man takes another man's wife back to his ranch and keeps her there for days?" Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "Seems to me there might be more going on here than simple rescue. Seems to me my wife has found herself a new protector, one she likes better than her legal husband." The insinuation was clear, and Willa felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. Marcus was trying to turn this around to make her the villain and himself the victim. It was a clever strategy, and from the looks on some of the faces in the crowd, it was working. "How dare you?" Willa said, her voice shaking with fury. "You tried to kill me, Marcus. You left me to die so you could steal my land. And now you stand here and lie about it, trying to make me look like the guilty party." "I think you have been in the sun too long, my dear," Marcus said, his tone patronizing. "You are clearly confused, imagining things that never happened. Why do not you come home with me and rest? We can sort all this out in private like civilized people." He reached for her arm, but Everett stepped between them, his body language making it clear he would not allow Marcus to touch her. "The lady does not want to go with you," Everett said quietly. "I suggest you respect that." For a moment, Willa thought Marcus might throw a punch. She saw his hands curl into fists, saw the rage flash across his face. But then someone else spoke up from the crowd. "Marcus, what is this about Willa's land?" The speaker was Gerald Harper, a respected rancher who had known Willa's father well. Marcus's expression shifted, becoming cautious. "It is a private family matter, Gerald. Nothing that concerns anyone else." "William Zimmerman was my friend," Gerald said, pushing through the crowd. "And I remember him telling me he set up that trust specifically so no one could take advantage of his daughter. Seems odd that you would be pressuring her to sign it over, especially given that you have had some trouble with gambling debts lately." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Willa saw Marcus's confident facade begin to crack. Gerald Harper's opinion carried weight in Red River, and his public questioning of Marcus's motives was shifting the narrative. "My financial affairs are none of your business," Marcus snapped. Maybe not, Gerald agreed. But William's daughter is. Willa, are you all right? Do you need help? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly broke Willa's composure. She blinked back tears and nodded. I am all right now, thanks to Mr. Osborne, but I have filed for divorce from Marcus based on his attempt on my life. Mr. Whitmore is handling the case. That announcement caused a sensation. Divorce was scandalous in 1878, something rarely pursued and even more rarely granted. But Gerald just nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. If Tom Whitmore is involved, then I reckon you have got a solid case. William would be proud of you, girl, standing up for yourself like this. Other voices joined in, people who had known her father, who remembered his integrity and kindness. Not everyone was supportive. Plenty of people looked scandalized or disapproving, but enough rallied around her that Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. This is not over, Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. He looked at Everett with pure hatred. You have made an enemy today, Osborne. I do not know who you think you are, but you just made the worst mistake of your life. I will take my chances, Everett replied evenly. Marcus stalked off, his supporters following. Willa let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her knees suddenly weak. Everett's hand was there immediately, steadying her. You did great, he murmured. That took real courage. Gerald approached, extending his hand to Everett. I do not believe we have met. I am Gerald Harper. Everett Osborne. I have a small operation west of the Zimmerman place. I know the land. You have done well with it from what I have heard. Gerald turned to Willa. I mean what I said, girl. If you need anything, you let me know. Your father was a good friend, and I owe it to his memory to look after you. Thank you, Mr. Harper. That means more than you know. As they completed their errands and prepared to leave town, Willa felt a shift in her circumstances. She was not alone in this fight. She had allies, people who remembered her father and valued his legacy. And most importantly, she had Everett, whose steady presence had become essential to her in a remarkably short time, on the ride back to Everett's ranch. They were both quiet, processing the confrontation and its implications. Finally, Everett spoke. He is going to try something. Marcus, I mean. Men like that do not just accept defeat, especially not public humiliation like what happened today. I know, Willa agreed. But what can I do except stay vigilant? You can let me help you. Everett pulled Buck to a halt and turned in the saddle to face her. Willa, I know we have not known each other long, but I want you to know that I am in this for as long as you need me. Whatever happens, you do not have to face it alone. The sincerity in his eyes made Willa's heart skip. She realized with sudden clarity that her feelings for this man had grown far beyond simple gratitude. She admired his strength, his integrity, his kindness. She enjoyed his company, looked forward to their conversations, felt safe and valued in his presence. She was falling in love with him, probably had been since that first moment when he had knelt beside her in the desert and promised she would be all right. Everett, she said softly, I do not know how to thank you for everything you have done. You saved my life, you have given me shelter, you have stood beside me when you had every reason to walk away. I am more grateful than I can express. I do not want your gratitude, Everett said. His voice was rough with emotion. I want. Damn it. This is not the right time, and you are still technically married. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is not just about helping or doing the right thing. Somewhere along the way, these past few days, I started to care about you in a way that has nothing to do with debts owed to your father or cowboy codes of honor. I care about you because you are smart and strong and beautiful, and being around you makes me happier than I have been in years. Willa's breath caught. She knew she should be cautious, should maintain distance until her situation with Marcus was resolved. But her heart had other ideas, and she found herself speaking the truth without reservation. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I know it is too soon, and I know I am still legally bound to a man I hate, but I cannot help how I feel. You make me believe in the possibility of happiness again, Everett. You make me think that maybe there is a future worth fighting for." They sat on their horses in the middle of the dusty trail, the afternoon sun warm on their backs, and looked at each other with dawning wonder. Then Everett dismounted and came to stand beside Willa's horse, reaching up to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands on her waist, and she kept her hands on his shoulders, and for a long moment they simply stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth. "When you are free," Everett said quietly, "when this mess with Marcus is behind you and you are truly your own woman again, I am going to court you proper. I am going to take you to church socials and buy you pretty things and tell everyone in the territory that you are the finest woman in New Mexico." Willa laughed, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I will look forward to that. But for now, what we have is enough. Your friendship, your support, knowing that you care. That is more than enough." They rode the rest of the way to the ranch hand in hand, leading the horses with their free hands, talking about the future in terms of possibilities rather than certainties. It was a heady feeling, this sense of hope and connection, made all the sweeter by the hardships they had already weathered together. The next few weeks were busy and stressful. Marcus fought the divorce proceedings with vicious determination, spreading rumors about Willa's infidelity and mental instability. His brother, the banker, pressured people who had expressed support for Willa, reminding them of loans and debts and business relationships. It was an ugly campaign designed to isolate her and force her back into the marriage. But Willa had underestimated the power of her father's legacy and the strength of the community's moral compass. For every person Marcus intimidated into silence, another stepped forward to support her. Gerald Harper testified on her behalf, describing conversations he had had with Willa Zimmerman about protecting his daughter's inheritance. Other ranchers spoke to Willa's character and competence. Even the minister's wife came forward, revealing that she had seen bruises on Willa's arms on several occasions, evidence of physical abuse that Marcus had carefully hidden through it all. Everett was her rock. He accompanied her to every legal proceeding, sat beside her in the courtroom, and provided a quiet strength that never wavered. He also helped her begin rebuilding her father's ranch, making repairs that Marcus's destructive search had damaged. They worked side by side, and in those hours of shared labor, their bond deepened into something profound and unshakable. 3 months after that terrible day in the desert, the territorial judge granted Willa's divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and abandonment. Marcus was ordered to pay court costs and was explicitly forbidden from any claim on the Zimmerman land. His reputation in Red River never recovered from the scandal, and within 6 months, he had left town entirely, fleeing creditors and shame alike. Willa stood on the steps of the courthouse, holding the decree that made her a free woman once again, and felt as though she could finally breathe. Everett was beside her, his face split by the widest grin she had ever seen on him. "It is over," she said wonderingly. "It is actually over." "The legal part is over," Everett agreed. "But if you are willing, I would like to start something new." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Willa's heart began to race. They were in public, dozens of people milling around the courthouse, but Everett did not seem to care. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect turquoise stone. "Willa Zimmerman," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I love you. I have loved you since you opened your eyes in that desert, and looked at me like I was your salvation, even though we both know you would have found a way to save yourself eventually. You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" Willa did not even hesitate. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The crowd around them erupted in cheers and applause. Everett slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps, a declaration of love and commitment witnessed by half the town. It was scandalous and perfect and exactly right. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the Red River Church. Willa wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit. Everett wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, and he looked so handsome that Willa felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the altar. Gerald Harper gave her away, standing in for the father who would have loved to see this day. The wedding was followed by a celebration at the Zimmerman Ranch, which Willa and Everett had decided would become their primary home. It had more land and better water than Everett's place, and it meant more to Willa emotionally. Everett's cattle would be moved to the combined property, creating a ranch of respectable size with good prospects for growth. As the sun set on their wedding day, Willa and Everett stood together on the porch of the house her father had built, watching the last guests depart. Everett's arm was around her waist and she leaned into him, feeling perfectly content. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "I am more than happy," Willa replied. 6 months ago I was dying in the desert, betrayed and alone. Now I am married to the man I love, I have my land and my freedom, and I have a future full of possibilities. I am blessed beyond measure." "We both are," Everett said. He turned her in his arms and kissed her gently. "I promise you, Willa, I will spend every day of our life together trying to deserve you." "You already do," she assured him. "You saw me at my lowest moment and treated me with respect and kindness. You fought for me when I had no strength left to fight for myself. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but problems and complications. That is the measure of your character, Everett Osborne, and it is more than I ever hoped to find." They went inside together as the stars began to emerge overhead, ready to begin their new life as husband and wife. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, subject to the whims of weather and market forces beyond their control. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle lost to disease or predators, and all the thousand small struggles that came with trying to make a living from the land. But Willa and Everett faced everything together, and their partnership made them stronger than either could have been alone. Willa proved to be every bit as capable a rancher as her father had been. She had an eye for good stock and a head for business that complemented Everett's skills with horses and cattle management. Together, they built the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region, respected for both their livestock and their integrity. 2 years after their marriage, their first child was born, a son they named William Everett Osborne after Willa's father. He was a healthy, loud baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-green eyes. Everett proved to be a devoted father, spending hours each day with little William, teaching him about the ranch and the land as he grew. 3 years later, a daughter joined the family. They named her Caroline Rose, and she had her father's patience and her mother's determination. 2 more children followed in the years after that, another daughter and a son, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a growing family. Through all of it, the love between Willa and Everett remained strong, growing deeper with each passing year. They still rode out together to check on the cattle, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the wonder and gratitude of people who had found something rare and precious. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with Gerald Harper's wife, who had become like a grandmother to them. They rode out to the place where Everett had found Willa, a pilgrimage of sorts to acknowledge how far they had come. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not been riding through that day?" Everett asked, standing with Willa at the spot where he had first seen her collapsed against the boulder. "Sometimes," Willa admitted, "but not in a fearful way anymore. I think I was meant to survive, meant to find my way to you. My father used to say that the worst things that happen to us often lead to the best things in our lives. I did not understand that then, but I do now." "Your father was a wise man," Everett said. "I wish I had known him longer." "He would have loved you," Willa said with certainty. "He would have loved seeing what you have built with his legacy, how you have honored his memory by treating his daughter and his land with such care and respect." They watched the sunset together, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples, the land spread out before them in all its harsh beauty. The desert that had nearly claimed Willa's life was now familiar territory, the place where she had built a life worth living and a love worth dying for. "I love you," Everett said, the same words he had spoken countless times over the years, but which never lost their power. "I love you too," Willa replied, leaning into him. "Thank you for finding me in the desert. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Everett said simply. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, they could see lights glowing in the windows of their home, could hear the distant sound of their children playing. It was a good life, hard-won and deeply valued, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect and abiding love. The Osborne Ranch became known throughout New Mexico territory as a model operation, and Everett and Willa as a model couple. They employed fair practices, paid their workers well, and contributed generously to the community. When Red River grew from a small settlement into a proper town, they were instrumental in establishing a school and helping to fund a new church building. Their children grew strong and capable, raised to value hard work and integrity above all else. William, the eldest, took naturally to ranching and became his father's right hand as he matured. Caroline developed her mother's head for business and eventually managed the financial aspects of the operation with impressive skill. The younger children each found their own paths, but all remained close to the family ranch and the values their parents had instilled in them. As Willa and Everett aged, their hair turning silver and their faces etching with the lines of years spent in sun and wind, their love never diminished. They were still each other's best friend, confidant, and partner. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought the children were not looking, still talked late into the night about their dreams and plans. On a warm evening in the spring of 1903, 25 years after that fateful day in the desert, Willa and Everett sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. Their children were grown, some with families of their own, but they all gathered regularly at the ranch for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked, holding Everett's weathered hand in her own. Everett was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Every choice I made, every hardship we endured led us here. To this life, to this family, to this moment. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Willa said softly. "Even the terrible parts, even Marcus and that day in the desert, because without those things I might never have found you." "You would have found someone," Everett said. "Maybe," Willa agreed, "but not the right someone. Not the man who looked at me dying in the dirt and saw someone worth saving. Not the man who stood beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. not the man who has loved me faithfully for a quarter of a century. That man is you, Everett Osborne, and I thank God every day that it was your path that crossed mine in the desert." They sat together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when Everett had found Willa and promised she would be all right. He had kept that promise, not just for a day or a week, but for all the years that followed. He had made her all right by loving her, by standing with her, by building a life that honored both her past and their shared future. As the moon rose over the New Mexico landscape, silvering the sage and casting long shadows across the familiar ground, Willa thought about the girl she had been, left to die by a man who valued money over life. That girl was gone, transformed by hardship and love into a woman of strength and purpose. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and used it as the foundation for the best life she could imagine. The desert had tried to claim her, but instead, it had given her everything. In its harsh expanse, she had found the man who would become her salvation and her partner. In its unforgiving heat, she had discovered her own resilience and courage. And in the shadow of death, she had found a life worth living and a love that would endure beyond all trials. Years continued to pass with the steady certainty of seasons changing. Willa and Everett watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling the ranch with new generations. They taught their grandchildren to ride, to respect the land, and to value family above all else. Each child heard the story of how their grandparents met, of the desert rescue that had changed everything, and they grew up understanding that love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances. When Everett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, Willa mourned the loss of her partner and best friend. But she did not despair, because he had left her with so much. A family that thrived, a ranch that prospered, and decades of memories filled with love and laughter. She lived another 5 years after his death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, always with a story to share about the remarkable man who had saved her life and stolen her heart. When Willa herself passed at the age of 78, she was buried beside Everett on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as blue and endless as the one that had witnessed their beginning. Her children placed a stone marker that read, "Willa Zimmerman Osborne, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was found in the desert and built a life in bloom." The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to the love and hard work of its founders. And every child who grew up on that land heard the story of how their great-great-grandmother had been left to die in the heat, and how a cowboy with gray-green eyes had found her before the desert could claim her life, giving her not just survival, but something infinitely more precious. A love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that would endure forever. In the end, what had begun as a tragedy in the merciless desert sun had transformed into a story of hope, resilience, and enduring love. Willa and Everett had proven that even in the darkest moments, when death seemed certain and betrayal complete, new beginnings were possible. They had shown that true love was not just about passion or romance, but about partnership, respect, and the daily choice to stand beside each other through whatever life brought. Their story became legend in Red River, passed down through generations as an example of courage in the face of adversity and the transformative power of love. And somewhere in the New Mexico desert, where sage and juniper still grow in the red earth, the land remembers the woman who refused to die and the man who refused to let her.